February 2nd, 1959, a young Texan with a bass guitar he barely knew how to play stood in a freezing Midwestern venue, dead tired, half sick, and fed up with the worst tour of his life. His friend and mentor, the man who had handed him a future, walked over and asked if he wanted a seat on a chartered plane heading to the next stop, and the kid said no. He gave his seat away. Hours later, that plane was wreckage in an Iowa cornfield, and Buddy Holly was dead. Waylon Jennings spent the next 4 decades living like a man who understood, deep in his bones, that every day was borrowed time, and he had no interest in spending any of it being careful. Born on June 15, 1937, in Littlefield, Texas, Jennings grew up in a family that worked cotton fields and scraped together whatever they could. Money was theoretical for most of his childhood, but what that small, dry town lacked in comfort, it delivered in grit, and Jennings absorbed every ounce of it. When he was 8 years old, his mother pooled what little she had and bought him a secondhand guitar, then taught him his first song, and something locked into place that day that nothing would ever fully pry loose. Not addiction, not divorce, not the Internal Revenue Service, not the Nashville machine, nothing. His talent announced itself quickly and loudly. By 14, Jennings had secured his own weekly 30-minute radio show, a feat that had no business happening for a teenager from a West Texas farming town. And local talent competitions and a growing reputation all pointed somewhere worth going. School, on the other hand, pointed nowhere he wanted to be. The rigid discipline suffocated him, and things reached a breaking point when a principal came at him with a paddle. Jennings grabbed it right out of the man's hands, then stared him down and declared that he would be doing the paddling, not the other way around, which led to a 2-hour standoff before the football coach stepped in. Not long after, the superintendent suggested he leave permanently, and Jennings walked out at 16 without looking back. His father, rather than arguing, handed him a harder lesson. If you're smart enough to quit school, you're smart enough to work. And work he did, burning through long hours of grueling labor that left him too exhausted to find the trouble that swallowed other dropouts whole. Those grinding shifts kept him alive and pointed him toward the only real escape route he had ever identified, which was the guitar in his hands. Music got everything he had, the focus of someone simultaneously running from something and toward something, and the results showed fast. A regular spot at a local country music radio station followed, then a disc jockey position in Lubbock, Texas, where his deep, commanding voice caught the attention of everyone who heard it, including one particular musician passing through town. Buddy Holly heard him and told him plainly, "The way you sing, there's no limit." Holly meant every word. He took Jennings under his wing, cleaned up his image, booked him a recording session, and eventually pitched an electric bass guitar at him with a 2-week deadline attached. Jennings had never played bass in his life and taught himself from scratch anyway, which was exactly the kind of stubbornness Holly had spotted in him. By early 1959, Jennings had a spot in Holly's touring lineup for the winter dance party. Green as a gourd by his own admission, but burning with enough hunger to fill in every gap his inexperience left open. The winter dance party was a punishment masquerading as an opportunity. 25 consecutive shows through the frozen Midwest, an unheated tour bus, icy rural roads, sub-zero temperatures, and musicians dropping ill one after another. The Big Bopper had developed a severe flu, and frostbite was working its way through the group. When Holly finally snapped and chartered a small plane, Jennings had a seat waiting. Then the Big Bopper shuffled over, genuinely miserable, and asked if he could have it. Jennings, never the type to fly warm while someone else sat in the cold, handed it over without hesitation. Across the room, guitarist Tommy Alsup lost a coin toss to Ritchie Valens, who claimed the last available seat, and none of them had any idea what they had just decided. In the early hours of February 3, 1959, the plane went down into a frozen Iowa field, killing Holly, Valens, and the Big Bopper instantly. Rock and roll lost 3 of its brightest names that night, and the day the music died, as it would come to be called, ripped something out of Jennings that took years to even begin growing back. The morning the news reached the surviving musicians in Moorhead, Minnesota, grief came down like a wall. The agency managing the tour gave them no time to fall apart, finish the shows, or go unpaid, and Jennings went back on stage and played his sets and quietly came apart from the inside. What made it worse was the last thing he had said to Holly before the flight. Holly had teased him about riding the freezing bus again, and Jennings had shot back the way old friends do. "Well, I hope your plane crashes." A throwaway joke between 2 young men who assumed they had decades ahead of them. Nothing more than that. But Jennings was a deeply superstitious Southern man, and those words sat in his chest like a stone for the rest of his life. Logic told him a careless joke had nothing to do with a mechanical failure over Iowa, and everything else told him differently, and the guilt never fully released its grip on him. Back in Lubbock, the disc jockey job waited, but the man who returned to it bore almost no resemblance to the one who had left. The electricity that had made him magnetic to audiences had gone quiet. His marriage to his first wife Maxine was unraveling fast, and one night he came home to find her standing on a chair with a necktie looped around her neck. Their relationship deteriorated through moves to Arizona, drifting radio gigs, and a growing number of children born into a household running on fumes. Eventually, the only thing that made sense was music, and he went back to it the way a person goes back to breathing, because the alternative genuinely was not available to him. Nashville came next. By the mid-1960s, Jennings had divorced Maxine, married a bar owner named Lynn, who had him, in his own words, by the yin-yang on a downhill pole, then divorced her too and married a woman named Barbara, whose millionaire father offered him anything he wanted, and released his debut album Folk Country, officially launching the next chapter of his career in country music. Nashville was a machine built on polish and control, and Jennings fit nothing about it. For a time he played along, and the output came fast. Then he moved into a tiny apartment with Johnny Cash, and everything accelerated in the worst possible direction. Cash was already deep in his own war with amphetamines, and Jennings followed him straight into it. He later spoke about that stretch without apology, describing how he prided himself on taking more pills, staying up longer, singing more songs, and running harder than everyone around him. The drugs kept the machine moving, and they also slowly took the machine apart. His marriage to Barbara collapsed under the weight of his infidelity, and Barbara, with resources most wronged spouses never have, hired a private investigator who went undercover as a groupie and delivered the evidence cleanly. Before she was done, she had destroyed his rhinestone suit and smashed one of his guitars against the wall, and Jennings later admitted he was never going to give up the guitar to hold a home together. Marriage number 3 ended in fire, and with that, he stopped pretending otherwise. What followed bordered on performance art and self-destruction. 30 amphetamines a day, days without sleep, and women stashed on 3 separate floors of a Louisville hotel, while Jennings sprinted up and down the emergency staircase between them on pure chemicals and nerve. His body dropped to 138 pounds, and he acknowledged without much drama that he had been bent on destroying himself. That changed when he met Jessie Coulter in 1969, a singer who existed in the same world he did and understood it completely. They married the same year, recorded duets together, earned a Grammy nomination in 1970 for their version of Suspicious Minds, and became country music's most compelling couple. The drugs, though, kept running alongside all of it. Hospitalized with hepatitis, drowning in alimony debt, with the Internal Revenue Service applying pressure from a separate direction entirely, Jennings came close to walking away from music and returning to disc jockeying. His drummer talked him back with one piece of advice: play with a rock and roll attitude and stop letting Nashville dictate who you are. Armed with a new manager who negotiated real creative freedom and a real paycheck, Jennings released This Time in June 1974, and it climbed to number 1. The dark sunglasses, the wide-brimmed black hat, the bushy beard, the image belonged entirely to him, and suddenly the whole country knew exactly who he was. Outlaw country had a face. Cocaine arrived shortly after, introduced by his drummer as a solution to the amphetamine problem, and functioned instead as an upgrade in the wrong direction. When the Outlaws album, featuring Jennings, Jessie Coulter, Willie Nelson, and Tom Paul Glaser, became the first country album in history to go platinum, his income exploded, and so did the habit. A staggering $1,500 a day was what the cocaine was costing him at its peak, every single day, and the Drug Enforcement Administration had started paying attention. In 1977, a package arrived at his recording studio during a session, and he knew immediately what was inside. Seconds after setting it down, an accidentally open talkback button let him hear DEA agents walking through the door, and in one fast move, he ditched the package, kept recording loudly to cover any noise, and let the agents stand around uselessly while their search warrant, written for the wrong address, expired on its own. The toilet flushed. The evidence disappeared. Charges were eventually dropped after costing him $100,000 in legal fees, and Jennings turned the whole episode into a hit song, because of course he did. Television handed him a new audience in 1979 when he became the narrator of The Dukes of Hazzard. a show he described himself as a moonshine excuse for car chases and watching Catherine Bach in cut-off jeans. He wrote and performed the theme song Good Old Boys, which became the biggest commercial hit of his entire career. Behind the success, Jessie watched her husband fade. Cocaine had dulled his instincts, stolen his creative sharpness, and left him hearing things that weren't there. None of the warnings from doctors reached him the way a single moment did. Their 3-year-old son Shooter found one of his straws and started mimicking him, and Jennings, in that instant, got clean. 7 packs of cigarettes a day replaced the cocaine, and a diet built around refried donuts, chicken-fried steak, biscuits, gravy, and grilled cheese sandwiches consumed in quantities his body eventually refused to absorb without protest. A near heart attack sent him into surgery for a quadruple bypass, and when he woke up, Johnny Cash was sitting beside his bed. Doctors took one look at Cash, ran tests on the spot, and immediately scheduled him for emergency bypass surgery of his own. The two men recovered side by side, reportedly spending their time laughing about hospital gowns and the complete uselessness of fame when your chest has just been opened up. Diabetes followed. Chronic pain settled in. By 2000, the pain in his leg had grown severe enough to end touring entirely, and surgery failed to restore circulation, which meant that in 2001, doctors amputated his foot. That same year, the Country Music Hall of Fame inducted him, an institution dedicated to preserving the history and artistry of American music, but Jennings was too ill to attend the ceremony. On February 13, 2002, he died in his sleep from complications related to diabetes at 64 years old, which, given the full accounting of everything he had put his body through, felt simultaneously too soon and like an absolute miracle that he made it there at all. Waylon Jennings changed country music in ways the genre is still working through. He proved that authenticity could outsell polish, that an outlaw spirit could fill arenas, and that the truest version of an artist is always more interesting than whatever a record label constructs in its place. He survived a plane crash he wasn't on. He outlasted the Nashville music industry system that tried to own him. He outran federal drug enforcement agents by listening through a talkback button. He made it through addictions that killed people with far less appetite for life than he carried. The outlaw bit, as he sang himself, may have gotten out of hand, but nobody who ever heard him would have wanted it any other way.